So okay. So there's a leadership issue here, which we need to talk about, right? But the way I see it, the problem has always been there. What is the problem? It's vulnerability and insecurity, because the Muslim community has a unique situation whereby a large proportion of its youth are migrant individuals that live in other countries in Europe or in America or whatever, right? So that's what differentiates the Muslim community in general from the Christian community, amongst other things, okay? Now, the vulnerability has always been there, and you can see how the vulnerability has been exploited over time, even before Syria. You know, even in a non radical or terroristic framework, just crime amongst youths, or how youths end up being drug dealers, or whatever it is. But when Syria came, the right petri dish at the right temperature emerged, and then the bacteria grew out of control, right? So now, one of the issues that I think we have is lack of, as well as instability in our communities, and an identity crisis that is caused by migration. We also have lack of diversity in thought, which is why I put up this integrative complexity thing. All backgrounds, all expertise are useful, but the problem that we have, and you look at a lot of the leaders in radical groups like ISIS, a lot of the leaders are qualified in science and positivist subjects, mathematics, engineering, subjects that require 1 or 0 binary thinking, which is useful. It can make you a decisive individual, but it doesn't nurture integrative complexity, which is the ability to handle nuance and different ideas at the same time, which is the antithesis to radicalization, right? So I think we also need to be making sure that our children are in they're in a wide variety of subjects and having different influences from different fields. I think this is very important.
Yeah, and you're right to point out it's the character. Again, people have been writing in the chat section that this or that is characteristic of any cult, but that is definitely, I think, essential to any cult, is to take advantage of people's insecurities and their.
So the question now is leadership, is a centralized leadership like the way that Christians or Catholics have with the Pope, in the Islamic case, would that present solutions to issues like ISIS in Syria, or would this create more problems? If there was one person, like if everything was centralized,
I don't know, because it would always be susceptible to manipulation. But I want to speak to a point about the instrumentalization, or the instrumentalization of these groups. I don't know if you guys have touched upon it, but the way in if we speak about or think about the Operation Gladio, for example, as a kind of starting point. Operation Gladio is now well known and attested to. NATO stay behind operations that were geared towards creating this state of tension, or what's I think the proper term, strategy of tension. Now, the way in which this was done, most famously in Italy, was through the use of paramilitary groups and terrorist actions in Italy in the mid-70s and 80s, I believe, which was blamed then on left-wing groups, right? But we now know, obviously, that it wasn't that. It wasn't these left-wing groups that were doing it in the majority, or in most cases. In reality, it was NATO stay behind operations in order to get the burgeoning popularity of these left-wing organizations and left-wing groups across Europe out of the picture, out of the mainstream, basically. And it was done across Europe, Belgium, Italy. So these, basically, why I start off with Operation Gladio is because these groups, these paramilitary groups, were used as tools for NATO expansionism, basically. That's the long and short of it. Now, what I'm saying is, I'm drawing a direct connection between that and the use of non-state actors in Libya, Syria, Iraq, wherever. I think you should pull up the map by Colonel Ralph Peters, Blood Borders. It's called Blood Borders. Colonel Ralph Peters. He famously in the War College presented a map of a redrawn map of the Middle East, and it showed the various Arab states that would be split up. This was in early 2000s. This was before any engagement, any battle engagement. Definitely before Iraq, if I'm not mistaken. And from Blood Borders, we move on to it kind of indicates that there were plans to cut up Syria, cut up Iraq, cut up Libya. And the more updated map is by Robin Wright, the famous journalist of the Sunday, I think it was Sunday Times. I might be mistaken on that. But Robert Wright, he's got a map called A New Middle East, and that also kind of draws upon the Blood Borders map, but it's kind of updated. So it shows on what possibilities, how these state structures in the Middle East and the Arab world, how they could possibly change, how the borders could change. Now, what I'm saying is, okay, this is all well and good. These are deliberations by military-minded people, kind of seeing how things on the ground may change realities on a state level, on a state structure level. But what I would always ask is of course, cui bono? In whose interest is it? In whose interest does it serve that the surrounding Arab nations or the Arab world in general is divided and split asunder and balkanized? My answer would be, just so I'm not coy with it, the answer would be Israel. Israel stands to benefit from this kind of destabilization campaign, from this balkanization campaign. Now, to draw the connection before and let other people come in, because I do have more to say on this. The connection between Gladio and these modern day kind of paramilitary groups, non-state actors, is that they are also today, just like in Operation Gladio, they are being used today to further the ends of other than their own. I mean, we all are in agreement that it's not to the benefit of any of these Arab countries what these non-state actors are doing and committing in terms of atrocity. So of course we kind of, well, I'm interested in the instrumentalization, and what I would argue is that before any engagement in the Arab world in the 90s, of course, the kind of base, the operation for hardline extremists, for jihadists, was London. That's why London was called Londonistan. And this isn't my words, by the way, in terms of London being a base. I point towards Abu Mus'ab, Abu Mus'ab al-Suri, famous strategist of Al-Qaeda, notorious. He's Syrian as well, so he's very relevant here, Abu Mus'ab al-Suri. He arguably created the strategy of tension with Islamic garb in his famous tract. I can't remember the name of the book that he wrote. That was it, Call for a Global Islamic Resistance, right? He advocated in Islamic terms the same strategy of tension that we saw in Operation Gladio, right? So you would provoke the authorities through civil disobedience or through outright military attacks, and that would cause the state, of course, to come down hard, and that would create some type of sympathy for your group, right? And this is all, as I say, it's a strategy that he's took the time to write up, and he's published it, and it's available on the internet. Now, Abu Mus'ab al-Suri is famously, he was close to bin Laden. He was out there in Afghanistan. He was also, arguably, it took part in the attempted coup in 1984 in Syria. But the point about Londonistan, just to finish off with that point, and then I will stop, that he's the one who said that that London was the place to be in the 90s if you were an Islamist. It was the place to be. There were numerous publication houses. There was numerous famous preachers, hardline Islamist preachers in London, based in London. And he was like, yeah, this is the place to be. And he actually moved to London in the 90s. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Zerb. Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, just a quick question. When you were, just to clarify something you said, when you asked who had to benefit from this kind of balkanization, which is a good word for it, balkanization of the region? Did you mean that kind of the primary beneficiary in terms of a local state actor would be Israel? In which case I would totally agree with you. I would only add that you have to look at sort of various corporate, sorry, my baby's crying in the background. I hope that isn't too noisy for you guys. My wife's the main corporate, there are major corporate beneficiaries, and the military industrial complex of various complexes of various Western powers, whether it be the US, the UK, who would all benefit from the balkanization of them. I mean, look at Halliburton's, Dick Cheney's company, and however many billions it was that he earned out of the Iraq invasion. And there are even, I would argue, plutocratic or capitalistic interests, if you want to be a bit more abstract about it, within that region who benefit from this. And that, if you look at some of the Arab rulers that people rightly label as kind of pawns of the West, I think that their family, their dynasties, some of them have got very, very rich off their complicity with kind of Western aggression. That's all I would add to that.
But I just wanted, just while we're on the topic of divide and conquer and how it's catalyzed the Syria issue, I want to make a really important point, mainly for Emma, for her studies, is that a lot of people talk about Sykes-Picot as being the instance where the West began to divide the Ottoman Empire into new countries. But it's not Sykes-Picot. Sykes-Picot was the discussion. The actual treaty that divided the Middle East was the Treaty of Sèvres. So if you ever write about this in one of your essays, don't write Sykes-Picot, write Treaty of Sèvres.